Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What's going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how you doing this Monday morning?
I'm doing great. It was a nice weekend. It wasn't the most exciting football game in the world on Saturday, but it did mark the end of the preseason, which means we don't have to sit through any more boring football games like that for the rest of the summer. Now, of course, there were some exciting moments. There were some key takeaways from that game, and I'm excited to dive into that. But I'm really just excited because football season is nearly here. It's this first bye week of the season, and then next Sunday, Giants are going to be playing. Next Monday, Jets are going to be playing. These are the games that count. So we're almost there. Final roster construction time over this next week, or really just over tomorrow, and there will be some reshuffling after that. But it is a very exciting time for the NFL season.
So I got to ask the first question off the bat. Did you have your 6 chicken cutlets?
I did not have my 6 chicken cutlets, unfortunately, because I was at a buddy's place for a fantasy draft, but I did have my 6 chicken wings, if that's any better.
Okay, there we go. So for those who missed it, Anthony was on Fireside Giants live streaming, previewing the game, and popped in. I said that he should have as many chicken cutlets as the Giants score points. Giants scored 6 points in this game. I will say, fiance made chicken cutlets last night, so I got in on the action just a day later. I can't wait for the leftovers today. I know your take on the leftover cutlets. It's coming in just an hour or so over here, so excited for that. But let's get into this game, Anthony. As you kind of mentioned, real snooze fest. If you like offense, this wasn't the game for you.
No, not at all. I mean, this was a really boring game from an offensive standpoint. It was exciting to get 4 quarters of Tommy DeVito. I was very happy for that, but unfortunately, they sent Tommy DeVito out there to die, basically. They sent him out there with the worst offensive lineman you've ever seen play football, Evan Neal included in that mix, and the worst group of wide receivers and tight ends that you've ever seen suit up for the Giants. It was just ugly. Tommy DeVito wasn't working with a lot of talent. Tommy DeVito didn't have a great night himself. He had a couple decent plays. He had that 17-yard scamper on 3rd and long. Like, he had some moments, but overall, this was not a game for fans of offense. And honestly, it's a little bit of a concern here because the Giants offense has not really had any impressive moments throughout the entire preseason. Like, all 3 of these games, even when the starters were in week 2, the offense has been stale and stagnant outside of the 48-yard touchdown run from Eric Gray. It's been ugly, and whether it's the first string, second string, third string, or even 4th string in the lineup, it's still Brian Daboll calling the plays. So I don't know if there are fans right now who are starting to feel concerned with Daboll, or if they're just starting to feel concerned with the talent on the roster. Either way, I do think that a level of concern needs to be risen just due to the fact that the Giants offense was not only bad in this game against the Jets, but was really bad all throughout the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the point totals, 14 against the Lions the first game, then 10 against the Texans, starters played in that game, and 6 against the New York Jets. And this one in particular, too, something that jumped out as a concern from the Giants side of things, there were a couple starters on the offensive line playing, at least guys who high draft picks, let's say, like John Michael Schmidt's starter. He played a little bit in this game. Evan Neal, debatable whether or not he's a starter, but, you know, 1st round pick, high draft pick, and the line still didn't look very good. And yes, the Jets have a strong defensive line, but I mean, it was undrafted free agent Braden McGregor, 2 sacks. Takk McKinley, who the Jets picked up off the street a month ago, 2.5 sacks. Leonard Taylor, UDFA, 1.5 sacks. Like, yes, these guys have performed well in the preseason and have a chance to make this roster. And we're obviously fighting for a roster spot, but it's not like they were going up against, you know, an elite level defensive line. It's guys who are, you know, fighting for a spot here. And they had 8 sacks in the game. Tommy DeVito was sacked 8 times in this football game.
Yeah, it was messed up to put DeVito behind that kind of an offensive line, and that performance was really disheartening because even through the other two preseason games, we were talking about how Carmen Brasillo, the new offensive line coach, seemed to be having an effect because not only did the first team offensive line look great in that week 2 game against Houston, but even in that first preseason game against the Lions, I thought the backups looked great. Everything just seemed to be more cohesive. So we thought that was Carmen Brasillo's coaching taking effect. But in this final game, that kind of fell flat, and it really just looked like lack of talent all across the board. You mentioned how a couple of those high draft picks played. Ironically, the only two high draft picks that were in there on that first team were the two players who got hurt. Both John Michael Schmitz and Evan Neal got rolled up on. Both of them injured their ankles. Apparently, neither one of them is injured severely. But what terrible luck is that for the Giants? Like, I just can't believe that that's the kind of luck that we have. And looking at Evan Neal, I mean, we discussed that at length yesterday on Fireside Giants. This guy is not an offensive tackle. It is so clear to me that he is a guard. All of his highlights, or I wouldn't even call them highlights, but all of his positive moments in that game were as a run blocker. And I think it's so clear that he cannot play on the edge. That's where he keeps getting beat with speed, but he doesn't get beat with power. Move him to the interior. I think Saturday night's performance really highlighted that, and it's time for the Giants to finally react accordingly and make the change.
Yeah, I just don't know how you can continue to keep trotting him out there with these kinds of performances at tackle. There was some debate when he was coming out whether he would play at guard or tackle, and then which side. And obviously, with Andrew Thomas as the left tackle long term for the Giants, it became obvious he was going to play right tackle, and it hasn't gone very well. But he has shown the ability to play inside in the past, and like when you bring in a guy like Jermaine Illuminor, who at least is he an elite right tackle? No, but is he solid and above average and it could be a good starter for you? Yeah, I absolutely think so. And he would be a significant upgrade over Evan Neal. I think this is really the only choice left. They're doing a disservice to whoever's starting at quarterback if you keep putting Evan Neal out there at tackle. But any concern with either the injuries for these two offensive linemen also?
I'm just concerned about the fact that they suffered injuries just because it's been a trend for both of them. They can't seem to stay healthy, whether it's their fault or not. I know it's bad luck they got rolled up on, but it is concerning just in that sense. But the injuries don't seem to be long term. I think that Schmitz is going to be fine to start week 1, thank God. And Evan Neal isn't going to start week 1 anyway, but I do think he'll be healthy enough to suit up if he needs to. So, not overly concerned. But more so watching that offensive line get berated, the Giants offensive line I was more so impressed with the performance of the Jets defensive line. And again, like you said, it wasn't starters. There was a lot of backups still working the Giants offensive line. But guys like Leonard Taylor and, Tack McKinley, they had really standout performances. And for the Giants, from my perspective, and hopefully from the perspective of Joe Shane, you're looking at that defensive line saying a couple of those guys might shake free this week. Maybe tomorrow afternoon, a couple of them hit the waiver wire. I think that the Giants getting that final opportunity to scout them in a game setting against their own players might lead to some sort of waiver claim being put in if a player does shake free on the waiver wire.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking at what the Jets defensive line did, the names that I brought up who really stood out, Tack McKinley, Braden McGregor, Leonard Taylor, and with how Tack McKinley has played in this preseason and training camp, he almost feels like a lock to make this roster. But the other two, Braden McGregor and Leonard Taylor, you'd love to keep them, but it's just a numbers game. And we'll get into it a little bit more in the second half of the show when we go over, 53-man rosters and decisions. But if one of McGregor or Taylor or even both, depending on what happens, if they don't make the initial 53, to your point, I think the Jets are going to have a really hard time getting them through waivers and to the practice squad because I don't know how, like, especially if you're Joe Shane and the Giants, I don't know how you could watch what this defensive line just did to you. And again, granted, it was backup players, but still the performance that they did in this game, and not only this game, but in the two leading up to it and what they put on tape this summer, and not look at it as a potential upgrade to some of your own depth on the team.
No, I think it absolutely could be viewed as, a depth upgrade. I saw that the Giants, decided to not suit up Elijah Chapman. He didn't participate in this game. So that says two things to me. One, they're higher on their interior defensive line depth than I clearly am. And number two, Chapman is a lock to make this roster after being a UDFA who really stood out all spring and summer. I think it's an awesome story. I love that for him. But for me personally, the emergence of this undrafted rookie Elijah Chapman should not be something that prevents the Giants from seeking more interior defensive line talent on the waiver wire. And again, because the Jets have such great talent on that defensive line, you have to imagine that there are going to be some players from the bottom of that roster who shake free. And I think that the Giants should have used this as a valuable scouting moment, not only on the defensive line, but in the Jets secondary. We all know that the Giants have problems in the secondary. This Jets team has a lot of depth defensively, a lot of young players who probably aren't going to make the roster. The Giants, I really hope, were doing their due diligence, scouting the Jets throughout this game, because I thought there were multiple standout performances from these Jets defenders who could really help fill out the back end of the Giants roster.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And maybe not a position on the defensive side of the ball, but someone who stood out for the Jets that in a positive on the offensive side, and someone who we've discussed a lot, potentially being another odd man out, is Izzy Abanikanda at running back. Had a really strong showing, 9 carries, 83 yards, averaged 9.2 yards per carry. Had the long 45-yard touchdown run where he was breaking tackles. Small Izzy Abanikanda going through and breaking some tackles there. Anything stand out to you on Izzy Abanikanda's day, and any thoughts on him either cementing his spot on this Jets roster or maybe being a priority free agent for somebody?
Yeah, I mean, he looked great. And whether he makes the roster or not, he's going to make a roster due to this performance. Like, he's definitely shown that he's got some juice and he's got some talent. He can play in the NFL. One of my major takeaways, though, from his long touchdown run is that a lot of those Giants backups are absolutely getting cut for that play and that play alone. The tackling was atrocious, but still a great play from Izzy Abanikanda to turn that kind of seemingly 10-yard gain into 48 yards and a touchdown. So that was a cool moment for him. And like you said, I think that whether he makes that Jets team or whether he makes another team, he's definitely proven that he can be an impactful player somewhere. And maybe it's not in a full featured role, but in some sort of a role, he's definitely got the talent. And I think that was a really important moment for Izzy to kind of go out there, prove what he can do on the football field in a live game setting, and hopefully garner himself some attention on the waiver wire this week if that's where he ends up.
Now, I want to ask you, just based on performance, because I don't know a ton about this guy, but he just kept racking up tackling. KJ Cloyd, tackling machine. Any chance that he makes this Giants roster here, or was he kind of just sacrificial lamb? You're going to play the second half of this preseason game because we don't have anybody else.
I think it was sacrificial lamb. You're going to play. I think he played the whole game. Let me double check that. Yeah, he played 64 total snaps. So he played the entire game for the Giants. That's probably why he racked up so many tackles. But even still, that was a crazy tackle total. You don't see that usually in an NFL game. But no, I don't think that's something that solidifies him on this roster, just due to the fact that the Giants already have Bobby Okereke and Micah McFadden as their 2 starting off-ball linebackers. They have Isaiah Simmons behind them, who they really like and I really like. Carter Coughlin's one of their linebackers and a core special teamer, which KJ Cloyd is not. Deontay Johnson has looked really good all summer. He's injured, but they're probably going to save a roster spot for him. And then also Darius Masua, who they drafted in the 6th round this year. Good young linebacker talent, really great leadership qualities and special team qualities. So unfortunately, incredible performance from KJ Cloyd. All those tackles, I think he had 16 in total. He looked great. He's not going to, I don't think he's going to make this roster. I don't think there's any chance just because he doesn't stack up on special teams the way some of these other guys do. And honestly, for the first time, like in 10 years, the Giants actually have a lot of talent at linebacker. It was for years and years, they had nothing going there. Now they have more than enough talent and some decent depth. So unfortunately for him, he's the odd man out. But I think after racking up 16 total tackles and 64 snaps, he'll find a job somewhere and probably land at least on somebody's practice squad.
Yeah, that seems like a practice squad player to me. Benton Whitley as well, 1.5 sacks, 3 quarterback hits in this game. Kind of the same thing I see on the Giants depth chart right now, kind of listed as 3rd string behind Boogie Basham and Brian Burns.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for him to make that roster because you mentioned Boogie Basham, you mentioned Brian Burns, but you also have to think Azeez Ojulari probably stays on this team unless he gets traded like fans are calling for him to, which he really shouldn't. Benton Whitley's been a standout performer all summer. I just don't know if he makes the roster or makes much of an impact just due to the fact that we have other players all around the place who are probably going to make it over him. But he's a name to keep an eye on. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if he does make the team, but I also wouldn't be shocked if he gets cut. Like, that's just simply the reality of it. But he's been, I think he's been with the team for 2 years now as a former undrafted player. So I think he's somebody that Coach Dable and the rest of his staff like. And have been keen on developing. So maybe they do hold on to him.
Yeah, it absolutely is, a possibility here. Getting back to the Jets and some names that I thought stood out. Obviously, we talked about the defensive line. Um, I thought Brandon Smith, the wide receiver who's fighting for a roster spot, he only had one catch, but it was a 39-yard catch. It was a big play down the field. Caught his one target. He's been really good on those 50-50 balls this preseason. And that's like another name where I'm thinking like probably not going to make it would be my guess, but kind of just wondering if he's done enough to sneak on the back half of this team and maybe surprise. Like Jason Brownlee made the Jets last year and kind of had that same role, but he's been very streaky in camp. I'm wondering if the Jets maybe see something in this Brandon Smith kid. But I wanted to give him a shout out for that one catch on the sideline that was on the 40-yard pass.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great play right there, but you do kind of struggle, or at least I do, to see him playing some sort of role or even making the roster just because even Jason Brownlee, like you mentioned, kind of played that role in the past. He ended up with 5 targets and 3 receptions for 29 yards versus the 1 target and 1 catch, as you mentioned, for Brandon Smith. So I think that's one to keep an eye on, but probably as a player who I think is a stash on the practice squad and continue to develop player. Jets have a lot of talent in that receiving core, and they've got players getting healthy like Mike Williams, and it's just going to push other younger, less proven guys out of the door, unfortunately. So I don't know what the ceiling is for Brandon Smith, but hopefully he can continue to develop on the practice squad and make some sort of an impact in the future.
Absolutely. The one guy who's going to be a very important piece to this Jets team this year that did not play well in this game was the kicker. Greg Zuerlein missed 2 kicks, one a chip shot, a short field goal. For me, doesn't really register as a concern yet, just because of how good he's been for them over the last couple of years. But that did register as a surprise for me, for someone who's usually, as I said, automatic hits from distance. He had a 60-yarder either last year or the year before, and missed a chip shot field goal and shanked another one way wide in the 40-yard range.
Yeah, a little surprising, a little weird. I don't know if it's something that you want to be concerned about. The Giants actually were playing a backup kicker. I didn't even realize that we had a backup kicker until this
Nice.
preseason. But I guess it makes sense. Graham Gano coming off of an injury. I'm hoping that he's healthy and fully ready to go for the regular season. We haven't seen him kick this summer. I don't know if there's anything to be worried about there. But with Greg the leg, I don't think you have much reason for concern. It is kind of weird, though. I do feel, anecdotally speaking, with kickers, they'll reach a certain age and then all of a sudden just drop off, right?
Yep.
Like, that's how I feel like it happens with kickers. They don't usually like gradually get worse. They just drop off at one point. So I don't think that's happening with Greg, but I guess you never know. Maybe it's something to monitor and keep an eye on. But again, I just think that's it probably is the MetLife Stadium, swirling winds. It gets very windy in that stadium because of the way that it's built. Sometimes it just messes with the kicks.
I love this spin zone from First State Jets. Said, missed it on purpose just to remember what it feels like and use it as motivation. I'm going to choose to think that's what the play was. The Jets told them, get a couple out of the way now, and then use that as motivation for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I like that. That's great.
Good stuff. Anything else from this final preseason game that you wanted to hit on, either Jets or Giants?
I'm glad it's over.
Yeah, kind of the same thing. Like, it feels kind of shitty to say, like, oh, glad it's over, because there's a lot of, especially the people we saw in this game, this is the last time they're going to suit up in the NFL for a lot of these guys, which kind of sucks to see their dream come to a close. But very, very much so ready for the calendar to flip to September and for real season, regular season football to be here. Giants open up in 13 days, 2 weeks from today. Jets 49ers, Monday Night Football. So, I mean, not next Monday, the Monday after, should be a pretty fun show, recapping the Giants' first game and doing a little bit of a preview of what to expect for Jets 49ers on Monday Night Football.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait for that. That's going to be a blast. Obviously, like we've said, there's that 1 week bye where it's kind of roster construction time. Tomorrow is going to be the big cut day, and we'll react to that on Thursday. And then after that, the teams usually make a lot of changes in terms of taking players off of injured lists or putting them on injured lists, going through those final practices, and really setting their first unofficial depth charts for the regular season. So it is still an important and exciting moment in the NFL right now, leading up to the regular season. But like I said, I'm happy the preseason is over just because I'm ready We have all these question marks and expectations for different players on the team. I'm ready to see it shake out. Like, I'm ready to see, is Daniel Jones going to respond to that bad preseason performance? Are we going to see Tommy DeVito this season? How's this Giants pass rush going to look now that they're fully healthy and have all their starters? All of that stuff. So it's going to be really fun. Like you said, less than 2 weeks away, and I just can't wait.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. The Jets and Giants both have some roster decisions here to make in the next, honestly, just over 24 hours. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. is when the roster's got to get to 53. It's not, and not to go full old man yells at cloud here, but I kind of miss when they would have the cut downs throughout the summer. Like, I think going from literally like 90 to 53 in 3 days is kind of extreme. But moral of the story, they have a lot of guys. Both teams have a lot to cut down on. Do you have any, I guess, expectations of whether it's a surprise or something that Giants fans aren't going to like that you think is going to happen with this roster in the next few hours here?
Not really. I think that the Giants kind of revealed what their main plans are by sitting a lot of guys during that final preseason game. Like Elijah Chapman, you would think would have been the big question mark. Did he really secure his roster spot by chasing down a running back 40 yards as a defensive tackle? Well, he didn't suit up for the final preseason game. So, yes, he did secure that roster spot. I don't think that there's much that can be done in these cut days that's going to wow fans unless a trade gets made. And that's kind of the thing is Joe Shane loves to make trades. He made 2 trades at the end of last preseason. Right before the final preseason game, he brought in Isaiah Simmons for a 7th round pick. Then he brought in Boogie Basham for a 7th round pick on cut day. So if the Giants end up making any type of exciting move or surprising move, rather, it's going to be via the way of trade. Whether that be bringing in a player or sending out a player for a draft pick. Again, Azeez Ojulari is the hot name right now. I guess Evan Neal as well. Some fans are trying to float out there that the Giants should try and trade him. I don't think there's a single team in the NFL other than the New York Giants that wants Evan Neal on their roster. And I don't even know if the Giants want him on their roster. So, again, I don't think that anything shocking is going to happen for the Giants. Most of these roster decisions feel pretty cut and dry. But we'll see. If they end up cutting my boy Tommy Cutlets, I will be rioting in the streets of New York.
Thursday would not be a fun episode if Tommy DeVito gets cut. That's going to be tough, but I think your guy's safe after after what happened with Drew Lock being a little bit banged up. I think they're going to want to keep 3 guys around here. Although I did see a lot of slander on Twitter, where it's after the game, people were saying like Giants really do have the worst quarterback room in the league, which I don't know if it's fair to say that after that Tommy DeVito performance on Sunday, but a lot of people down on the Cutlets, Lock, and Jones here.
I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. This is definitely one of the worst quarterback rooms in the NFL. It's pretty tough because the reason that is so bad is because you can't tell who the best player in the room is. That's honestly the truth of it. A lot of people will say it's clear, cut, and dry. It's Daniel Jones because he won a playoff game in 2022, but you have to factor in the fact that he's coming off this torn ACL. He didn't play well last year, and he has a lot of injury history. So based on probability and how likely he is to get injured compared to the other 2 players and the general quality of each of them, it's kind of tough to tell which one is truly the best, most reliable player of the 3. And considering that 2 of them are career backups, that doesn't say a lot of good things about your starter. So it is kind of a rocky road right now. But again, I'm a Giants fan. I've got a Giants shirt on. So I'm hoping and praying that Daniel Jones is the comeback player of the year and wins MVP and hoists the Lombardi trophy. But I don't know. It's not going to be pretty. I don't think. It's always been divisive talking about Daniel Jones on every platform. And I think this year more than any, because his back really is truly against the wall, it's going to be a really ugly kind of conversation throughout the year if the going gets tough. And then we'll have to see what the conversation looks like around Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito if they do get a chance to play.
Sticking on the Giants and some decisions on the offensive side of the ball, how do you think this wide receiver room shakes out? Because we've talked a lot about the depth that they have. And I'm wondering about guys like Isaiah Hodgins and Allen Robinson and like if any of them are going to end up making this roster.
I think the wide receiver room is interesting. The team has 4 locked in starters, basically, with Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton. Behind them, it's just a toss-up. Like, will it be Hodgins? Will it be McKenzie? Will it be Allen Robinson? Do one of those guys make it? Do 2 of those guys make it? I highly doubt 3 of them. I think Isaiah McKenzie is the one that I would lock in, though, which is surprising because I don't think he was on a team last year for a full season. Like, I think he bounced around and really struggled to find his footing on a roster. But I think because of his familiarity with Brian Dable and more importantly, his ability to contribute on special teams, he's going to make the roster. So then it just becomes a really difficult decision between Allen Robinson and Isaiah Hodgins. Which of the big bodied wide receivers do you believe in more? Which one do you think is going to be a better fit for this team? I would lean towards Isaiah Hodgins just because we've seen him in this offense with this quarterback find success and he's a little bit younger. But the reliability and veteran presence of Allen Robinson also does hold value. So I think it's going to come down to which one the Giants feel is more valuable. Is chemistry with the quarterback and age, or is it reliability and veteran experience? I think I would go with Isaiah Hodgins, but again, we'll have to see what the Giants coaching staff decides.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Isaiah Hodgins is a fit that makes a little bit more sense. Robinson, I mean, he's just not the guy that he was a few years ago. Had a great NFL career, really solid, and at times even underrated wide receiver. I don't think he has much left in the tank, unfortunately, and I think that was kind of proven this preseason with some of his play. What about Gunnar Olszewski also? Because that wasn't he the returner too?
Yeah, Gunnar Olszewski is a special teams player. Like, he really doesn't even play much wide receiver. He's a kick and punt return specialist. And it's kind of been like the Giants have given Isaiah McKenzie the reins to special teams all summer in the preseason to see if he could take that job from Olszewski or maybe just prove to be a solid backup to Olszewski. And I think that he did. And I think that he also proved to have more receiving upside than Olszewski. So I think that probably both of those guys make the roster. And so ultimately the Giants end up holding 6 or 7 wideouts. But again, you don't really view Olszewski as a wide receiver, so I don't know if I would place him on that portion of the depth chart. You just place him under the special teams portion, but I do think he makes this roster.
Rock has a really good idea of maybe how the Giants could fix their quarterback room. I wanted to bring that on the screen. Bring back Tim Tebow and give him a chance. Tim Tebow and Tommy Cutlets would be a pretty electric quarterback room, if we're being completely honest, though.
You know, you're not wrong about that. The memes would be spectacular. The week-to-week jokes about the New York Giants would be off the chain, but I don't think he necessarily elevates the floor or ceiling. I think I'm going to pass on this one.
Yeah, I don't really blame him on that. He does have a question, though. I don't know if you're a college football guy, but he goes, favorite college football team since week 1 is this weekend. Do you have one?
So I'm not a huge college football fan. I don't follow it closely, but I like to follow certain players as they're coming out of college through the draft process. And usually my favorite players always come out of LSU. So I do say that I am an LSU fan. Like, OBJ is one of my favorite players that I watched in college, Joe Burrow. Like, I love all those guys. So I follow them more closely, but I don't really follow college football to a T because I went to Stetson University. I don't think any of you watching have probably ever heard of Stetson University. And if you have, you definitely haven't heard of their football team. So I don't really have like an alma mater football team to root for here. So I go with LSU. And in the college football video game, I went with Rutgers. So I think I'm turning into a Rutgers fan now as well.
There you go. I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Like, I didn't go to a school that has football, and college football isn't really as big in New York as some other areas of the country. So, but I would say I'm like a very casual Texas Longhorns fan. Like, if I were to sit down and watch a game, my preference is Texas, but it's not like I'm religiously watching them every week and can tell you every guy on the roster. And if there's like a better matchup, but like I'll watch college football for the good matchups. I'm not like living and dying every single week with those ones, but it's interesting. Harlan's heard of Stetson University, so you got a fan.
Roll hats, go Hatters.
I love it. Johnny Boy is with us as always. Says, with all the injuries to the Bills, do you think they will pick up our sloppy seconds? That's an interesting one because the Bills obviously have had some injuries and a lot of turnover on the defensive side of the ball. I think if the Jets are going to lose players here, which is going to happen, I would think it would be defensive linemen are the most likely to get poached, or Izzy Abanikanda if he doesn't make the roster, which I've seen a lot of Dallas Cowboys fans fawning over Izzy Abanikanda the last couple weeks here, as they're not in love with their running back situation. But I would think Leonard Taylor, Braden McGregor, Eric Watts, and maybe like one of Jalen Holmes or Bruce Hector could maybe get picked up somewhere if they don't end up making this roster. But my thought would be defensive linemen potentially getting poached if they don't make this team.
Yeah, and then the only problem there with the Bills from that perspective is I don't think they're very high on the waiver wire in comparison to a lot of these other teams that need defensive line help, even namely the New York Giants. I
Yep.
think that they might be interested in picking up a guy like Leonard Taylor, who was really impressive against them in this preseason and in those joint practices. So the Bills being low on the waiver wire, I think that they might like to pick up some of the Jets, trash. One man's trash is another man's treasure. But I just think they're probably too far down the waiver wire priority. Meanwhile, though, the Giants, I think, are sixth. So we've got a pretty good chance at picking up some of your guys.
There you go. I was going to ask, is there not necessarily a player, because I think it's very hard to tell like who's going to get cut from some of these other teams, but is there a positional group that you could see the Giants targeting and trying to bring in more talent or more talent as we get some of these cuts coming through?
Yeah, I really don't think they're done at cornerback. I think that they wanted one of these guys to take that job this summer, namely Cordell Flott. I think they really wanted him to step up and win that starting CB2 job. He spent most of the summer hurt, barely played, did not look all that impressive when he did play. Meanwhile, you've also got Nick McLeod, who they wanted to show something and be impressive in place of Flott, maybe win that starting job. He didn't have the best summer either. So then you get down to some of these other guys like Trey Hawkins, decent potential, nice upside, not a necessarily immediate starter that you can bank on. So I think the Giants are just going to continue to search the waiver wire, hope to find a cornerback that can start some games for them or even open up week one as the CB2. But again, I think that's going to be tough to do. It's going to be slim pickings across the NFL. However, I think that's the position they're going to be targeting.
There you go. Before we get to some guys or some positional groups, rather, the Jets can target, Johnny has a question for Anthony. With Bradbury from the Eagles, that might be getting cut. Would you guys take a flyer on him? Obviously, some familiarity with Bradbury and the Giants.
I wouldn't. I know some Giants fans would like to, and he was great when he was a member of the New York Giants. But if you've watched him over the past couple of years with the Philadelphia Eagles, it's just been worse and worse. Like he is one of those players that is clearly declining. I would rather re-sign Adoree Jackson. Adoree Jackson didn't spend the summer on a team. He left in free agency, but didn't go anywhere. He's still a free agent. He has more familiarity with this coaching staff and with this roster. James Bradbury has familiarity with the organization because he was here, but he doesn't have familiarity with Joe Shane, Brian Dable, and his staff. So I like Adoree Jackson as a potential re-signing. I think that he makes sense. He would come cheap. He would come with reliability, at least gives you average-ish play from the cornerback spot, and it gives you familiarity. So that would be the reunion that I would keep an eye on. Bradbury, unfortunately, just not what he used to be. And I also am not sure if his playing style fits the Giants scheme. Meanwhile, I know that they're trying to keep a lot of overlap from last year's system in this new one. So I know Adoree Jackson would be a fit.
Yeah, and like it's gotten to the point where they moved Bradbury to safety even too, which that's like usually the last ditch effort for that veteran corner. Be like, let's try to resurrect this guy's career or keep him in the league a little bit longer and try him at safety. But I thought his first year in Philly was pretty good, but last year I'm just pulled up his PFF numbers. He allowed 9 touchdowns in coverage to just 1 interception. Coverage grade 54.7 after 80.2 the year prior. Just real tough go of it this past year, and clearly on the roster bubble in Philly. So I'm with you. I wouldn't touch him, even though he did at one point have some success a couple years with the Giants there.
Yeah, he had great success. Like at one point, he was a top NFC cornerback, but like you mentioned, he was moving to safety. That's always the sign. That's what the sign was with Logan Ryan several years back when the Giants picked him up. He actually ended up having a pretty successful second win in his career at free safety. I don't see that for James Bradbury. Very different player, not a lot of experience in the slot, which is usually what makes a player translate well from cornerback to safety. I don't know. I just don't see it with Bradbury. Instead, I think Adoree Jackson, like I said, would be that reunion that I would look after. But I also think the Giants are probably going to look to bring in new, younger blood at the cornerback spot over the next few days.
Yeah, on the Jets side of things now, I think some not players, but positions that I could see them targeting. Clearly strong on most of the defensive side of the ball, but My thought is maybe either interior offensive line depth or wide receiver. I think they could look for an upgrade to some of their depth. Like, yeah, Alan Lazard coming back, and hard to move on from him. But if you're going to end up carrying 7 receivers and your 6th and 7th receivers are Jason Brownlee and Irv Charles, I think there's like that last spot kind of is where, wide receiver 6 or 7, we could be looking for an upgrade, or even maybe get someone who's closer to a wide receiver 4 and then push some of the other guys down the pecking order a little bit. Kind of have to see who shakes loose. Although this morning we see that Jordan Schultz is reporting that the Texans are getting some calls on John Mechie at wide receiver. I wonder if that's a name they at least check in on and see what the price of that would be.
Yeah, that could be an interesting move. Former second round pick there. So, that there's some upside and still young and still growing. So that could be an interesting move. And I think that position in particular, the back end wide receiver, like rounding out the depth of that room, usually you can find decent players there on the waiver wire. Even if you want to look at the Giants finding Isaiah Hodgins a few years ago, he ended up immediately playing in a wide receiver 2 spot for the Giants, but long term fell into that 5-6 role. I think that's a position that you absolutely can find rather easily on the waiver wire, and should definitely be something that the Jets keep an eye on.
There we go. Love this question from V-Man. You're Anthony, I'm sure you're not familiar with the legend of V-Man, but an absolutely iconic Jets commenter on YouTube. He wants to know, hey, Matt, off topic, can you speak Irish? So no, I don't speak it. The language is Gaelic. I don't speak Gaelic. I know that V-Man he's Puerto Rican and maybe the proudest Puerto Rican there is on the planet. But I'm going to flip it to you, Anthony. Do you know how to speak Italian?
I know a few words and phrases, but no, I cannot say that I know how to speak it. I would really like to learn, though.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Imagine we did a show where like I'm talking in Gaelic and you're talking in Italian. That would be just throw everybody off for a week.
Yeah, might make no sense to anybody, but would be a lot of fun.
I love it. Good stuff there. There's a good point that Peter calls out too. The initial 53 won't be the opening day 53. Changes will happen. So yeah, you have essentially, by tomorrow, it'll be 12 days for most teams that play their first game. Obviously the Jets play on Monday night, so it would be 13 days for them, but really good point that, we might see some initial panic on why a team decided to cut a player or do a certain thing. And then as you get closer to the start of the regular season, make a little bit more sense.
Yeah, there's always changes. They say, here's our final 53-man roster. Then the next day, they end up cutting one of those players and picking somebody off the waiver wire and making another change. So the final 53-man roster is never final. It is always fluid and it is always changing. So whatever gets finalized tomorrow as the 53-man roster, a week later, it's going to look different. And a week after that, it's going to look different. And you also have to keep in mind that the practice squad portion of the roster construction is so important, because sometimes teams will do tricky little things where they stash guys on practice squads so that they can hold on to one guy, make a trade, make the roster spot, and then bring that guy up off of the practice squad immediately after. So it's always interesting to see how these teams get creative in their roster construction. But again, like Peter's saying, this final 53-man roster tomorrow is not even going to be the 53-man roster in week 1, and it's definitely not going to be the final 53-man roster in week 17.
How about this question from Johnny Boy? What players do you guys think we showcase, both the Jets and the Giants, will be players we trade for some draft capital for the future? So any example on the Giants you could think of maybe a player that they try to flip for draft capital?
They already made that move probably with Jordan Phillips, so I can't imagine that they're able to make another one of those moves. Honestly, the sleeper one here probably would be Tommy DeVito. I think that they would be insane to go that route, but I could see them rostering him during the regular season. And if a team has like 3 injuries to the quarterback spot, he becomes a hot commodity. That could be a possibility. But more realistically, Azeez Ojulari is the one that Giants fans keep pointing to. He's in a very crowded edge room. There are definitely still teams around the league that probably view him as a potential starter, and he won't be able to play starting snaps for the Giants this season. I think they would be out of their minds to trade away a talent like that they can play in a rotational role. but the Giants are kind of always out of their minds. So that would probably be the one that they showcased that could end up getting traded. It just won't be a move that I'm happy with.
Yeah, for the Jets, I would think maybe Izzy Abanikanda, just because he's had a really strong preseason. There are teams, for instance, the Dallas Cowboys, who could use some upgrades at that position. Not talking much like late pick on day 3. We see teams all the time give like 6th, 7th round picks for players who they don't think would make it to them on the waiver wire or things like that. Guys who are essentially going to get cut that they're willing to give up draft capital for. So again, all that stuff would happen pretty much in the next 24 hours. So I do think it's going to be very busy for both the Jets and the Giants here. And I'm excited to break it down on Thursday, the fallout that we get from these roster decisions that are coming tomorrow.
No doubt. The fallout is always fun. Like, I really enjoyed covering the training or the cut day last year for the Giants because not only did they make some surprising moves, but they also ended up making a trade. And again, you can't rule that out with Joe Shane. It's always possible that he goes that route. So tomorrow's going to be very interesting for Giants fans as they kind of see how this GM responds to the summer. It's been a weird one for the team. It's had its exciting moments, but overall, I think that their lack of total talent and depth on the back end of the team was highlighted in the preseason. So I think it's going to be a pretty active day for the Giants tomorrow, and we should get some interesting news.
There we go. So that should do it for us on this episode today. Went through, recap the Jets Giants final preseason game against each other, got into the 53-man roster. When we're back on Thursday, we will have an update on the rosters for both the Jets and the Giants and anything else that comes out. But I think I'm confident that I could speak for Anthony on this one. I think we're just happy that preseason's over and flipping the calendar now to the regular season.
No doubt. It was a fun summer and a fun preseason, but we all know what we want. We want regular season football. We want that real action, whether it's going to be amazing, like it very well could be for the Jets, or it's going to be a terrible year, like it very well could be for the Giants. We want to get into it. We want to have fun during the regular season. That's what all NFL fans want. So really excited for it.
Absolutely. All right. That's going to do it for us in this episode. Please make sure to like, subscribe, comment, share with a friend, subscribe to Anthony's stuff on Fireside Giants. You can find me on Talking Jets and Matt O'Leary NY. That'll do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we will catch you next time.